The Provoke Podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Welcome, everybody, to our latest Provoke Media podcast, where I am joined by Rachael Sansom, who is the head of UK and Europe for Havas Red. And Havas Red, welcome, by the way, Rachael.
Hi, Paul. Lovely to see you again.
And Havas Red has just produced 14 red sky predictions for the communications business for the next year or so, which we're going to delve into in a minute or two because I thought they were extraordinarily interesting. But maybe let's just start, Rachael, by you giving me a little bit of background about these predictions and how you came up with them and why you think it's an important exercise.
Yeah, sure. So we started doing red sky predictions, I think, back in 2019, just as we as a global network were set up. Red was born then. And, we all know that insight, future gazing is incredibly important to clients. And we wanted to make sure that we had a really robust piece of thought leadership that we could utilize for things like this, but that was also incredibly useful for clients in terms of, major trends in the communications industry that were up and coming for the next year. So we're now in, year 6, 7, which is amazing. And we cover a whole variety of topics. Obviously at Havas, we have a huge amount of data that we can mine to get our predictions, as well as using, qualitative means. So talking to industry experts, talking to our clients, talking to the media. So we use a real variety of sources to put these together, but we hope they're a bit of a guiding light in terms of what will be the major trends affecting communicators in the next year.
Yeah, I think it's a great exercise. I think it's particularly useful right now. A lot of the conversations that I've been having with people on the marketing and communications side of things inside organizations have been about sort of public relations as the discipline that helps you make sense of the world. And I think sense making has gotten more difficult in the last 12 months or so because of all of the chaos out there.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure that I'm in a position to sensibly interpret what's going on in the present. So looking into the future must have gotten more difficult.
I think so. It has got more difficult, but we're only looking a year ahead. So, that's a reasonable timeline in terms of what is going on in the world. We're very much, as I said, aided by the huge amount of data that we have in Havas and the great client relationships that we have that really, steer us basically. So it has become a harder task over the years, but it definitely isn't impossible. And also, ultimately, this is our take on what's going to happen. As you said, we live in a completely disrupted world. So we may be wrong, but I think most years we definitely get a few things right. And it's very much our perspective in terms of the way that we see things moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I'd taken a look at the whole document, which as I said, contains, I think it's 14 predictions for the future. And I found them challenging and provocative and broadly aligned with my view of what's going on in the world. So for whatever that's worth, I found that useful. We're not going to go through all 14 of them. That would be a sort of lengthy conversation. But there were two or three that I thought knit together in an interesting way. And the one that really jumped out at me the first time I looked at this was this idea of truth as a core brand value and the essential brand value right now. And obviously, given what's going on in the world, I think it's fair to say that there is more disinformation and misinformation and flat out lying
Yeah,
in the zeitgeist than we've ever seen before.
exactly.
And there's been this sort of erosion of truth and trust. Um, I guess my question is, why do you think that's going to be so important going forward? And do you think it's attainable?
Well, I think there are several kind of elements to this as we talk about in the report, which is in terms of brands really, being seen and believed for truth by consumers. It's increasingly important. To your point, there's so much disinformation. Consumers are getting very cynical, and I think if brands aren't truthful, or organizations for that matter, they can really, feel a lot of consumer backlash. But I think also what I found interesting about this trend was what it means for actually communications professionals, whether that's people in agency or working within the brands themselves. Because I think, to your point, due to all the disinformation, etc., the fact increasingly communications professionals are going to have to be verifiers of truth. They're the ones that are going to have to ensure that fake news isn't being put out into the world or disseminated by the organization, and as we know, or manage the fake news that comes. So I think in terms of the role of a communicator, or the role of somebody who is a brand guardian, it's a really it's a really interesting trend. And I think it's really funny actually, because when I first read that trend, I was almost a bit taken aback, because having worked in the industry for a while like you have, Paul, I mean, for me, brand truth is, one of the fundamental tenets that any brand or organization, needs to be built on. But I think, the sad truth is that while many organizations are trying to forge the right path, because of some of the socio-political dynamics we've seen recently, sometimes they're not even able to live their truth in the way that they would want to. And I think, some of the disruption we've seen around DEI, for example, in light of some of Trump's policies in the US and what that has meant for organizations who perhaps haven't, while they haven't been non-truthful, perhaps haven't been able to sort of live their truth in that area as proactively as they would like to, due to the political climate. So, that in particular is a dynamic that I could never have imagined throughout my career. I was having conversations with senior comms people around that, who were like, we've had to rein back, we've had to change our policy, et cetera, et cetera. And, they were very surprising and unique conversations, very much born of our time. So, yes, brands need to be able to live their truth. It is very difficult to do because of the changing dynamics. They have influences outside of their control, as I just said, for example, the political climate. And as I also said, it just means that as communicators, we're all having to change our roles. It isn't just about putting out our best version of truth, it's about being verified sense checkers. And I loved what you said at the beginning about increasingly comms people are sort of being looked at as, the voice of reason within organizations. And I think we always have been, but I think even more so now. Corporate comms professionals in-house are so important at board level, because they are the people that need to verify the truth. They are the voice of reason. So, while this is a complicated dynamic, I am also incredibly proud that our industry is at the forefront of it in terms of trying to do the right thing and also navigating it on behalf of brands and organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an interesting issue there, and maybe an interesting tension between, I mean, I've never come across a PR trade association or a PR agency, I think, that hasn't sort of emphasized that truth and integrity and credibility are absolutely intertwined, and
Yeah,
therefore, as a profession, we have a need to be truthful. At the same time, people outside of the industry will look at public relations and see exaggeration and hyperbole and maybe over promising as routine. And I mean, in the last few years, we've seen a lot of accusations of things like greenwashing, where perhaps the sort of marketing of a company's ESG policies has gotten ahead of the reality. So
Yeah.
is that tension more difficult to manage than it has been in the past? And do we need to be sort of over-index on truth and trust when those issues come along?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think as we've discussed, the world is a very disrupted place. So all organizations and everybody within them is dealing with so many different things at so many different times that even if it's unintentional, things can be skewed or they can be out of whack. I think what I would say is, I'm sure this is your experience, given the people that you talk to broadly, is that the best communicators in our business, whether they be in-house or in agencies, as you rightly said, have always been the best of truth, integrity, and doing the right thing. And the value of that at the board table has become increasingly important. And I think the CEOs of the organizations that get it right have the best people, and then they listen to them. Where perhaps things aren't as clear or as muddy, it probably means that they're not taking the advice, or they haven't got the right quality in person in place to give that advice. But as I said, the upside of all of this, I think, for our industry is that it actually enhances, our place at the most senior tables, because you cannot navigate this world without excellent strategic communications advice, basically.
I noticed that the other sort of points that you make in the report, I think it was actually the first one, is that we're in an era now where crisis is the norm, where that's business as usual.
Yes.
We've been talking about perma crisis and even sort of perma poly crisis, which I guess means that there are always more than one crisis going on at the same time. Um, for the last few years, and I think that this theme of trust plays into that. Um, in
Absolutely.
that, that's when the rubber meets the road in terms of your ability to be honest with people and the need to be honest with people. But tell me a little bit about sort of how you see this crisis as business for usual, as affecting things and
Well,
how
yeah.
that fits in.
Again, I mean, you hit it on the head, and we say it, which is crisis is business as normal. Gone are the days where you'd be dealing with a sort of crisis for an organization, every so often, but not daily. And it's not even, and it's multiple crisis as well. And crisis historically was sort of handled on an ad hoc basis as they cropped up. I think now the different streams of disruption that organizations face have to have strategic plans against them that are running at all times. So I think the whole concept of what crisis management means has changed. Basically, it isn't let's do a statement, let's do this, let's do some media training, oh my god, thank god that crisis is over. It's like everything has to have a strategy against it that's running over the long term, basically, whether that is your ESG strategy or how you're handling areas of conflict in the world, or what that means for your supply chain. And I think the other difference is, whereas issues like, for example, supply chain might have been kept back of house and weren't really one for the comms people, now they are, basically, because of the disruption, because of the areas of conflict in the world. Supply chain is a huge issue. There has to be a continuous issues management program set against it. And that's only one example. So our world has become so complicated. What's being required of us is so complex now. But again, and I know I think this is like the third or fourth time I've said this, but again, I'm kind of pleased because I really think it validates, what we as a profession do, the importance of it, and it will leverage it more moving forward. So I very much see that as the upside, although, as we all do, I kind of wish the world wasn't as difficult as it is.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to say anything shocking or even particularly original when I say that, public relations professionals have long believed that crisis presents opportunity. And I think our experience writing about crises is that it isn't usually the original incident that
Yeah,
takes a company down,
yeah,
unless there's some sort of systemic bad practice going on. It's the way in which companies respond, and companies can, in fact, use this for proactive storytelling, but they absolutely have to be truthful with their audiences, and it is an opportunity to be seen, to be truthful and compassionate and genuinely interested in your stakeholders. And
yeah. I
um,
mean, I couldn't agree more. I think the rules, to your point, Paul, I think the rules of engagement have changed in terms of, the old rule book around crisis was contain it, probably say as little as possible, probably not mea culpa. And now, to your point, because truth is so important and people want to see authenticity from organizations as well. Like the whole rule book has flipped. You've got to be open. You've got to show how you feel about the issue, whether that's remorse or regret or, a more positive emotion. You've got to have a plan in place. You've got to take your communities with you because obviously through digital and social channels, you're in a constant dialogue with all your stakeholders and your consumers all the time. So the whole rule book has flipped over. But it's an incredibly interesting place to play, although as we've just discussed, incredibly challenging at the same time. But yeah, I mean, organizations need to show their emotions now. They need to be authentic, which is not something that was a key criteria like 5, 10 years ago. You could control the message in very kind of clinical terms. You can't do that anymore and still resonate.
right. Um, Not surprisingly, um, given that everybody is talking about AI, there's plenty of AI related content in the report. But I was sort of more interested, I think, in the sort of need for human interaction and a sort of human first approach, which you
Yeah,
mentioned. And I think we're all trying to figure out the right balance between human and AI input into communication.
yeah,
But with this focus on trust and truth, it seems to me that people trust other people. They want to be able to engage with humans. So
absolutely.
tell me a little bit about sort of how you see that balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you said, it's something we're all trying to work out, and we're struggling to, and we've obviously covered it in the report, but I don't think we've got the perfect answer. I mean, look, I think in our industry, as it stands at the moment, and this will probably change next week, AI has an incredibly, in terms of how we operate, it has a really valuable place in terms of efficiency. In terms of the external world, it is incredibly scary for communicators because, as the large language models use media as one of their key sources. So we have to be even more mindful about what we're putting out there now because it's going to be taken by basically a machine, interpreted and then redistributed, which, when we started looking at this a couple of years ago, totally blew my mind. So it's like, you can't even control that. But I mean, I think we're going to get to a point where communications departments are going to have to be thinking about what is the long-term messaging. I mean, we all think about that anyway for a variety of different reasons. But in terms of what does that mean that the LMM is eating, and therefore what is going to be regurgitated out for us? So there's a middleman in terms of AI that's beyond our control. Like up until this point, we've been able to put something on social media, or we've been able to put something, on the news agenda. And yes, we've had to work through journalists. And yes, if we put it out on social media, we're open to comment, etc. But we've suddenly got this uncontrollable thing in the middle called AI that's interpreting our stories and our data. So I have no idea what the answer is to that in terms of how you therefore make sure that your story remains truthful, remains authentic? I don't think any of us know the answer. But it's definitely going to be a challenge for us, as we move forward. And as you said, particularly in the age of truth, where we need to be as authentic as possible. Suddenly, things are more out of our control than they've ever been, basically.
I was really interested over the last sort of week or 10 days to see the response to some of the holiday advertising that is being produced right now. And for those of our listeners who are not in the UK, I think it's really difficult to understand just how big the holiday ads are here.
Yeah,
Everybody talks about them. It's kind of like our Super Bowl
yeah,
in terms of advertising. And it does seem to me that there is a really sharp contrast between some ads that have been telling like human stories through their advertising, and
yeah,
some others that have been using AI perhaps a little too
yeah,
blatantly.
yeah,
And there's no doubt that people are responding very positively to human stories and are somewhat less warm about some of the AI generated content. And I think there's a really interesting message in that.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think, at Red Havas and at Havas, we've always really felt that the human element is important. So, we've obviously experimented with ads that are purely AI driven, but there is just a blandness and a kind of one-dimensional element to them. I mean, they're excellent in many ways. So what you're saying about the more people orientated ones resonating more doesn't surprise me at all. And I think the other thing that will be interesting to see is that not just for copyright purposes, but there are still organizations that are trying not to do completely AI generated ads. I mean, some of our clients are in that camp, and I'm not going to name who they are because of all the ethical reasons. Yes, they want higher production quality. So what you're saying in terms of those reactions doesn't surprise me at all. I think it'll be interesting to see which organizations sort of move forward and think, great, AI is a way to do things cheaply, simply, we'll just make it AI generated, and those that keep the human element. But as I said, I think as a creative network, and you wouldn't be surprised that we think this, we think at the moment the optimum way is that you combine human creativity with AI, with real people, in the ads, for example, to come up with a fantastic product. So I think, using AI by itself can be a little bit one dimensional. Having said that, it can be great for, mass content production on an international scale, but where you need that emotive pull, as you would do with a Christmas ad, I think just using it by itself probably isn't the best thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I'm a creator myself, albeit in a sort of weird niche, but um, I see AI as having the ability to enhance human storytelling, not
Yes.
replace it,
Yeah.
certainly right now.
Yeah. Totally.
Anyway, I also wanted to pick up on something else that you had in the report, which was this idea of raw content, of sort of raw content feeling a little more authentic, perhaps, than
Yeah.
over polished content.
Yes.
And I've always felt that that was a potential advantage for people in our segment of the communications industry, because we don't need sort of 6 months of production time to turn
Exactly.
around a piece of content. We can do it almost instantaneously.
Yeah.
And the idea that raw is a benefit rather than a detriment, I thought was really interesting. Tell me a little bit about that and how you think that fits in here.
Yeah. I mean, I think as we see, Gen Z rise as a as a generation, obviously those guys, were all like natives of TikTok, etc., which, is all fairly raw content. They haven't grown up in a world where they've had sort of, you know, um, I'm a Gen Xer, so I grew up in a world where everything was polished. It was done on radio or TV, went through production, it was all beautiful. That's what I was used to. My daughter is total Gen Z. Everything was raw, everything's ready. That's what she's used to, and that's what she wants to see moving forward. But I think also as well, the reason that that is increasing in popularity is to go back to the truth and authenticity point. You know, if it is a piece of content that has been done in a real way, hasn't been put through a lot of production, it definitely can come across as you know, more authentic than something that looks over polished. And I think again for communicators, because obviously our whole job historically has been to make beautiful pieces of content in whatever form that are highly polished. You know, I think this is going to be an interesting challenge. It's like, how do we do this? And you know, in the brand sphere, obviously that's already happening. People know how to put out, you know, fairly raw content in terms of brand comms, etc. But if Gen Zers are going to be wanting to talk to about more difficult issues using similar content, you know, what does that look like? You know, what does the presidential speech look like in that context? How is that going to be produced in like 3 or 4 years' time to resonate with Gen Z? It's probably going to have a slightly different format. So again, I don't think we try and have all the answers in the report, but I think this is a really, really interesting trend, particularly for corporate and political communicators, because it will totally shift the rules of engagement in
Well,
terms of how you handle CEO and you know, political communications, basically. So what will that look like?
in some ways, it's the equivalent of what we saw, particularly in the American election
Yeah,
last year, where showing up on a podcast
yeah,
is maybe more effective than sitting down with an established news program. And you talk in the report about sort of the importance of, I think you call it dialect first social media,
yeah,
which to me means speaking the language, both
yes,
the verbal language and the visual language of the platform that you're using to engage people. And
absolutely.
that seems to me to be a way of building, again, trust and credibility and authenticity.
100%. And actually, it was interesting you talked about podcasts because I was about to come on to that, particularly in relation to CEOs. You know, we've got this whole new kind of generation of CEOs who have, you know, forget like a double page spread in the Wall Street Journal or the Times, have come up through the ranks of podcasting. So Emma Grade, who runs Skims, you know, she's a young woman. She's, I think, early 40s, maybe even late 30s. You know, she's obviously decided that she wanted to build her corporate profile beyond just sitting at the back of the Kardashians and running the business. And she's basically done it through, I mean, largely through podcasting by itself. So, I mean, I'm 100% agreeing with you. What this means for, you know, CEOs of multinationals moving forward, and as you said, political commentators, I just think will be fascinating. And then also as well, like the profile, because you know, you're going to have to look at different people other than the president communicating on TikTok because that profile doesn't sit well on TikTok. So what's that going to mean as well? You know, I just think it's a whole new world,
Right.
largely.
That leads me rather neatly into the other point that you make in the report, which I wanted to talk about, which was this idea that managers are need to be frontline communicators,
Yeah,
and it's not just the CEO anymore. And I'm interested in sort of why it's important for other managers to be visible, and then maybe to take it a step further and talk about ordinary employees who are out there talking about their experiences and their products and their services anyway,
yeah,
and who presumably can be harnessed
yeah.
or leveraged to be effective communicators too. So it's not just the job of the CEO and the communications department anymore.
Absolutely. I mean, I think just to take the question in two parts, I think the reason that, you know, a broader spectrum of managers is required is because to the, you know, Gen Z require so much more from their workplace now. It isn't just somewhere they come to work. You know, they demand a holistic care in terms of what else is going on in their life. And you know, the expectation is so much higher. And the kind of pyramid hierarchy where you just have one person at the top communicating, thus doesn't work for them. They need to see a much more broader branch. They need to see people that they can relate to on a day-to-day basis and probably work with, communicating. So I think that is a challenge for organizations. I can't say that anybody's that I am aware of has absolutely nailed it. I know that many large organizations are very aware of it and they're looking at how they do that. But I definitely think it's a work in progress, for most organizations, as Gen Z mature through the kind of work cycle. So yeah, absolutely. And sorry, Paul, remind me of the second part of the question because I
Oh,
was about to,
it was really more about sort of employees joining
yes.
in as
So
well as
I
brand ambassadors, or just spreading the word about the company.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is very key. I think, for many different sectors, I think particularly retailers were early into this because obviously they have great workforces that are public facing. I think, again, I'm not going to name names, but a few of our clients who are retailers were very early into this, thinking about how could, they harness all that great goodwill and enthusiasm that they had from their staff, whether that be through social channels, really using the staff as ambassadors. And again, I'm not going to say who, but I think there are some great case studies out there. And I think, we've talked a lot about the many challenges that organizations and brands are facing. But I think, if you can get your employee communication program right, it can be such a joyous thing because, the employees love participating in it. To what we talked about earlier, it really talks authenticity to your audiences. So there's so much room for so much great stuff in terms of using employees as communicators.
And you actually do talk in the report about the fast lane of internal communications. So let's talk a little bit about that. How does internal communications fit into
Yeah.
how you see things changing?
Well, I think internal communications perhaps historically, has been a little bit slower, perhaps hasn't been seen to need to work on the same immediacy as social media or news cycles. And I think all those rules have gone now. Internal communications needs to be run in the same way that you'd run external communications, whether that's disseminating information through your own channels to your employees quickly, whether that's making sure they're up to date with what's happening quickly. Obviously, the way that the external world is, news travels incredibly fast. So you've got to, I mean, this was always the rule, but even more so now, just to make sure that your employees have whatever announcements or news is going out before the rest of the world does. So, yeah, I mean, there is still a difference in terms of how I think organizations look at internal and external. But I would actually say the rules of engagement as per external now apply to internal, whereas I'm not sure they did before because you have to be as fleet of foot and as quick.
So what I'm hearing overall, and I do think this idea of truth as the sort of central value that underpins everything is, and this is sort of an interesting. I don't know that again. I don't know that it's a dichotomy necessarily, but it may be a tension between making sure that you are being truthful with consumers and other stakeholders and building trust that way. Um, but what is obviously a much more fast-paced, decentralized, maybe even informal approach to communication. Maybe what we're talking about is a values-driven rather than a rules-driven approach to what we communicate, but
Yeah.
then giving more people more freedom. That's quite a shift.
I mean, it's huge, and I think I haven't heard it as beautifully summed up as you just did then. So that's that's totally right. I mean, when I started, it was about rules. You knew the rules. If you stuck to the rules, you're probably going to be okay. And now it is about the values, which is a much more difficult place to wrestle with, and I think really requires organizations to dig deep in terms of what those values are. So how are they gonna run things moving forward? And the stakeholder group, as we both know, is just I mean, it's just so enormous for any brand, company, organization, and complex, and the channels. So I think you summed it up beautifully, Paul. I do think that is the shift that we're going through.
It also seems to be an environment where, you know, since we're in that sort of crisis-driven world, you can't eliminate risk altogether. You
Like,
can't, you can't sort of keep your head down on everything. Um, but
exactly.
there is tremendous opportunity
Yeah.
for those companies who sort of embrace a new
I
way of doing things.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of companies are struggling with and brands, which is because it is so complicated, the instinctual thing to do is to hunker down. Um, but as you said, that isn't the right thing to do at the moment. So it requires a leap of faith and it requires bravery to, I think, have the degree of openness that you actually need to succeed in the comms world. And, I think a lot of companies are still wrestling with that. And I get it. They've got a lot of different stakeholders. There's lots at stake. There's confidential information. There's so many dynamics to wrestle with. So it really does require bravery, incredibly good strategic planning, and a leap of faith to be as open and as truthful as I think the current climate demands, even though the current climate is so challenging in terms of all the dynamics that are going on.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting rallying cry for the profession,
Yeah,
actually, that we have to be radical truth tellers.
yes.
And if we can rise to that challenge, we can, in fact, deliver the kind of competitive advantage that clients are looking for. So that's
100.
great.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity's there, and you and I both know that we have the skills to do it, and that's what we bring to the table. The organization has to be open to that, but I think the best senior communicators I know are very clear on their mission to ensure that they do keep bringing that truth to the table.
Great. Well, I love the report. I love the insights. I love the fact that it's data driven, which is hugely important these days.
Thank
Um, and yeah, I hope it sort of sparks a wider conversation. Thanks very much, Rachel.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for your time. It was great. Really enjoyed it.
You've been listening to the Provoke podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.